Lake Orion. Welcome to the second episode of History Now here on ONTV. I'm your host, Anthony Taormina. And if you've noticed, ladies and gentlemen, I actually have a lot of textbooks, or a lot of books out there. It lets you guys know what the topic we're going to be covering for you tonight. We're going to be covering World War II on September 1st. On September 1st, 75 years ago, World War II officially began. And then on September 2nd, in 1945, World War II ended. So I want to give you, the viewer, a broad perspective of World War II. And I want to share with you guys my knowledge broadly about World War II and what the experiences of the Second World War were. Of course, every country participated in World War II. It was not just, the Allies or the Axis. Every country did. Every country had a role. There were countries that were neutral, countries that were, quote, satellite states, and then countries that were key players. When you think about World War II, you have to look back to the end results of World War I. The Treaty of Versailles. There were other treaties involved as well, but the Treaty of Versailles was the peace process between Germany and the Allied powers at that time, which caused Germany to end up losing land, particularly to Poland, to Czechoslovakia. Also, they lost the Rhineland to France. And many Germans were very, very bitter about the end result of World War I, and many of them blamed the German Jews, who at that time was only 1% of the German population in Germany. However, those, especially amongst members of the right, blamed the Jews for World War I, that Germany was stabbed in the back. This culture of nationalism continued not just in Germany, but you saw the rise of fascist governments in Italy, in Spain, in Portugal, and also in Japan too, where there was a militaristic government where the government favored the military. But still, these nationalistic, and not to mention other countries as well, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Austria, all had fascist governments at that time. Now, obviously the government roles were very different, but very important because World War II started as a result of what happened in World War I. Now at the same time, you've got the events going on in Spain, the Spanish Civil War. Japan had invaded China. Japan and China were already fighting in war. Japan was fighting the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, the rise of communism, the exact opposite of fascism. The Soviet Union was establishing themselves at the time, led by the Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin. Stalin was seen as a dictator that was, in many ways, him and Hitler were almost very parallel. In terms of how they ruled. It's just the only difference was Stalin was communist, Hitler was Nazi, but the stark contrast of both those men were very, very similar. One book I would recommend you to read, though I don't have it with me at this time, is Aaron Bullock's Hitler and Stalin. I would definitely recommend. He goes great in depth about the details about describing how Hitler and Stalin and how they had very, very similar backgrounds, very similar lives. It's a really, really good book to read. And I think that for those who are trying to understand, the war was really between Hitler and Stalin, the comparisons, the contrasts, and then also the differences as well between the two. But the Soviet Union was fighting Japan at the time. Also, you've got what was going on. Germany remilitarized themselves. They reinvaded the Rhineland without any competition or protests from Britain and France, who was at that time members of the group, the League of Nations. Italy had invaded Ethiopia in 1935. At that time, it was called Abyssinia. Italy, as a result, was kicked out of the League of Nations. And then also, Japan was, as I said, waging war in China. Other countries had territorial ambitions. Hungary had ambitions, especially reconquering their lands that they lost following the Treaty of Tryon. Poland even actually had territorial ambitions, especially in Czechoslovakia. Hitler wanted to invade the Sudetenlands in Czechoslovakia. He invited Hungary and Poland. Both countries were very willing to invade territory. Britain and France, particularly Chamberlain, intervened and said, hey, wait a minute, Hitler. Wait a minute. Let's have a conference. So Britain and France, at the time, Mussolini proposed a conference because Mussolini was kind of seen as the, quote, peacemaker of Europe. So Mussolini wanted to be seen as the peacemaker of Europe. So he was able to arrange a compromise between Britain and France and Germany with the promise that Germany would not invade any more land, and Britain and France would, that would allow Britain and France to keep the peace. And with Chamberlain's infamous agreement saying that peace within our time. Well, we all found out that that wasn't the case. Germany invaded Czechoslovakia and was not just the Sudetenland, but all of Czechoslovakia. He was able to give Hungary Ruthenia. Poland also got land as well. But at the same time, Spain was engulfed in civil war between the nationalists, that Nazi Germany, Italy, but also Portugal actually supported. Now, Portugal at this time was covered by a dictatorship themselves under Antonio de Salazar. Though he did not like Hitler and the Nazis, he respected Francisco Franco, his government in Spain, and they were able to, once the Civil War ended, they were to resume they had the Iberian Pact in 1939, which eventually kept both Spain and Portugal neutral in the war. And later on I'll address that role, or I might just go into another time where I'll address Portuguese and Spain and Spanish role in the World War II eventually. World War II began after Germany started to bully Poland over Danzig. Poland would not give up Danzig, and as a result, Hitler wanted to intervene, wanted to invade Danzig. He went on the claim that Germany that there were Germans that wanted the land there, that the Germans wanted the Nazis to come in. And in this case, Britain and France made a guarantee. Poland would be defended. So, and also at the same time, both Britain and France and Germany were all courting the Soviet Union. Now, in Norman Davies' book, the No Simple Victory, he talked about Stalin viewed this as a poker game, in which Stalin was hopeful that the Western powers were going to fight it out between themselves, and that the Soviet Union would just come in and take over the scraps. But Stalin saw an opportunity in Poland, just like Hitler did. So they came up with a pact, the Nazi-Soviet Pact in 1939, and it resulted in essentially Poland's fate being sealed. So on September 1st, 1939, Hitler invades Poland, and then 2 days later, Britain and France declare war on Germany. World War II is on. World War II is the Second World War began. Now, Germany experienced some success early on. The Blitzkrieg, Hermann Göring's Blitzkrieg, was able to overwhelm the Poles, who was also fighting an actual trench warfare. But at the same time as well, the Soviets were marching in from the east. And as a result, Poland was invaded between two giants, and as a result, Poland surrendered, and Poland was essentially under both German and Soviet occupation. But in the pact, it also mentioned that Stalin had free reign to many of the Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Though he was very reluctant on Lithuania at first, Hitler reluctantly also agreed that Stalin could get Finland as well. Now in Finland's case, Finland under Marshal Gustav von Mannerheim he said he was going to resist the Soviets. He was very successful in resisting the Soviets back in 1919, 1920 when Finland first gained its independence from the Soviet Union. So the Soviets decided to invade Finland, but the Finns resisted. And the Soviets were not used to the winter clothing, were not used to their winters, which was rare in the Soviet Union. That Finland was able to hold firm. Now, did Stalin get land? Yes. But at the same time, Finland was able to resist the Soviets, and as a result, Hitler would later see the Finns as a very reliable ally. Now, at the same time, Japan and the Soviet Union had finished their war in 1939, and they had concluded by 1941 a separate peace treaty with the Soviet Union, which is very important because when Japan would go to war with the West, they did not go to war with the Soviet Union until 1945. And when Germany asked Japan to invade Russia, Japan went south and said no. So we're back in the 1940. Germany invades the Western country, first they go north, they invade Denmark and Norway. Hitler, in Mark Mazauer's book, Hitler's Empire, views Denmark as the Great Protectorate. And what he means by the Great Protectorate is he saw that the Danes were just like ordinary Germans. He let the Danes run their own government. He wanted to do the same thing in Norway, but the Norwegians refused. So Hitler installed a Reich plenipotentiary, which is a diplomat with diplomatic powers, Josef Terhoven, to run the government, but it was also a Nazi puppet as well named Wilhelm Quisling, who was a Norwegian. Many Norwegians link him as a traitor. So when you see the word traitor in Norway, they call them Quislings. That's the reason why. So then the Nazis invaded Belgium, and then they had their biggest accomplishment, Belgium and also the Netherlands. They also invaded the Netherlands too, where they bombed their capital in one day, and they surrendered in one day. So Hitler now controls the Northwest Territory and the Northwest going into France. Hitler, instead of going northeast, ends up going through France had a defense line called the Maginot Line. Hitler instead decides to ignore the Maginot Line altogether, and he, along with the Nazi army, was able to invade France from the north. They went right through the Belgian Alps, and they were able to conquer France in relatively just 6 weeks. And at that point, the French government resigned. Marshal Pétain came to power in France, and he agreed to the Armistice Terms with the Germans, which many Frenchmen viewed as the darkest day. At the same time, Italy was very opportunistic and took advantage of the situation. And Italy declared war on France, and as a result, Italy only conquered a few small areas of France, but France was essentially split into two. The northern part of France was under German occupation, and then the southern part was under Vichy French occupation. So At the same time, the French colonies were given a choice to ally with the new rulers of France or the Free French, which is led by Charles de Gaulle. So many of them chose to side with the Free French and Charles de Gaulle, and swore to continue the fight as long as until the Germans were out of France. Now with France occupied, they turned to Britain. The Nazis decided to invade Britain using Operation Sea Lion, massive air war, the Battle for Britain, but the British were able to fight the German invasion and was able to prevent them from invading the British Isles, led by the British Army, the British Air Force in particular, and also the courage of Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister. Now, when we come back to History Now, we're going to bring up the 1940, we're going to go around 1941, we'll continue with 1941, and we'll go until 1943, here on second episode of History Now on ONTV.
The Orion Lighted Parade is a tradition that ushers in the holiday season here in the Orion area. Families line the streets in the village to enjoy this festive event, but it wouldn't be possible without the Holly Jolly Folly. This year's fundraiser is scheduled to take place on Friday, December 5th at Golling Buick GMC, located at 1491 South Lapeer Road. Enjoy live entertainment, a silent auction, a cash bar, and a 50-50 raffle. Food will be provided by Italia Gardens. Tickets are $35 per person and are available at Golling Buick GMC. For more information, call the Orion Area Parade Group at 248-802-5521 or visit orionlightedparade.org.
Welcome back to History Now here on ONTV. Right now, as we're back on the 1941. At that point, we were talking about Operation Sea Lion with Britain and resisting Germany. At the same time, there was fighting going on in the Middle East and in Africa. In the Middle East, the British were fighting Vichy French with German tactical support in Syria and Iraq. Also, they were fighting the Iraqi government, who was pro-Nazi, led by Rashid Ali in Iraq, but the British were able to repel them. Also, in Africa, Italy decided to start a campaign of invading and focusing mostly on invading Egypt from Libya, which was under Italian occupation. And also at the same time, Mussolini did that because he felt that Hitler was getting too much credit. So Mussolini wanted to invade Greece. He had invaded Albania in 1939, but he wanted to invade Greece. He didn't want to be seen as Hitler's lackey, so he tried to invade Greece. That was unsuccessful. The Greeks were very successful military fighters. They were also resisting. Also, the Italians had to fight in difficult terrain. And as a result, Mussolini had to plead for help from Hitler, and Hitler agreed to aid Mussolini. But at the same time, Hitler was deciding he wanted to invade the Soviet Union. He had seen the Soviet Union invade the Baltic countries. He had seen the Soviet Union carve up some land from Romania. Hitler wanted to protect the oil fields in Romania. Hungary also was wanting land in Romania. As a result, Hitler and Mussolini coincided the Vienna Awards between Hungary and Romania, and Hungary ended up getting land from Romania. Also, Bulgaria wanted land from Romania. But Hitler wanted to keep the oil fields of Romania. So Romania, under Ion Antonescu, allowed Hitler to bring in troops to protect the oil fields, which there was some friction between the two dictators, Hitler and Stalin, over that move. And they were also talking about land, about Hitler and Stalin also were talking about carving up land between them, Mussolini, and the Japanese government, which focused on wanting to carve up land between the four countries. But but the Nazis, I shouldn't say Hitler as much as the Nazi government, wanted the Soviets to move into the Middle East. But at the same time, Hitler liked the British Empire, and he didn't want the British Empire to be occupied, or they wanted to leave the British Empire alone. He had a lot of respect for Great Britain as a whole, the British Empire in particular. So it was very, very ironic, but that just tells you the misguidedness of Nazi Germany during that time. There was a lot of friction between the sides, like Hitler and Goebbels and Ribbentrop and Himmler and Goering, guys that they had their own agendas. So during that time, Yugoslavia overthrew a pro-Nazi government who wanted to join the Tripartite Pact, which was a pact that was signed between Germany, Italy, and Japan in 1940. Initially also Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and also Spain, and also Denmark and Norway all joined the pact as well. But Yugoslavia Serbian rebels overthrew the government, and Hitler was furious. He said he wanted to invade Yugoslavia. So then the Nazis, with the support of Hungary and Romania and Bulgaria and Italy, invaded Yugoslavia and would also eventually invade Greece as well. In that situation, Hitler respected the Greeks so much that he allowed them to keep their swords in an act of respect. But Yugoslavia was occupied, Greece was occupied. Hitler at this point had almost all of Europe in his hand. Now, Spain and Portugal were neutral, along with Switzerland and Sweden, but everything else was either Nazi-occupied or Nazi-allied. So go into June of 1941. Hitler invades the Soviet Union. The Nazis invade the Soviet Union. Now, according to Norman Davies' book, which is No Simple Victory, he argues that the Soviet-German war was essentially the entire war. Excuse me. That the British role in the war was just a sideshow. I disagree with that. The British intervened. They kept in the fighting. They stayed in the fighting. The British were pretty much the survivors of the war going into 1941. The British immediately granted aid to the Soviet Union, and a perfect example of the Soviet-British unity was the British and the Soviets invaded Iran, a country that was neutral. Excuse me. Country that was neutral, but a country that was very, very pro-Nazi and very much had German agents in the country. So an act of unity was the British and the Soviets invaded Iran. At that point, the Middle East was Iraq and Syria had been decided, and everything else was, and for the most part, the British ended up controlling those vast areas in the Middle East. Now, I'll discuss the Middle East in length some other time, just not right now. But the Soviets and the Germans were ready to go to war, ready to go in a massive fight to the death, massive struggle. So then the Germans were very successful at first. The Germans ended up gaining massive land. Excuse me, especially the Ukraine. The Ukraine fell, Kiev fell, and we're not talking about the Holocaust just yet. The Holocaust will be a whole nother section on our show. I'm just going into the broad perspectives of World War II. So then the Nazis were very successful, but it wasn't just the Nazis. It was Italy sending Italy, Romania, and then Finland. But especially Romania and Finland were very instrumental to Hitler's goals of occupying the Soviet Union, because those were the two allies that he strongly needed. Now, Italy sent in a group, sent in 2 divisions. Hungary sent in divisions, but also Spain even sent a division. So it was seen as a great crusade into the Soviet Union. Now, as for the Soviet Union, I'm thinking about just discussing this one in the Soviet Union. I'm just going to discuss this on our next show of History Now, because there's a lot of things to cover, and so very little time. We're running out of time, and we're just going to go right into it. I'm going to conclude phase 1 of the World War II debate, because we've covered 2 years. We're right now into the year of the German-Soviet War. We haven't even discussed Japan yet, and we're going to discuss Japan next week, especially with our next show, with the rise of militarism in Japan, but also the United States. I haven't talked about the United States yet. We're going to talk about the United States on our next show, then what role they played, not just as a military power, but also as an economic power, because the role of the United States played a significant role in why World War II was won by the Allies. Now, as for the show this evening, have a great night, and come back next time. We're going to go over the conclusion of our broad view of World War II here on History Now on ONTV.